In the 80s, BMW's Series 3 car was definitely the fashionable item. It was there for the shoulder pads and the mobile phones just as much as the enthusiast. But in truth, it was not a particularly safe car. In fact, in Sweden, they banned the big six-cylinder versions because they were considered unsafe. The trouble was primarily that they were not terribly good at the back end, that they were very light and they were very inclined to break away. And this made for an awful lot of accidents and an awful lot of second-hand 3 Series that you want to stay away from. It was a matter of making profits from the uppies, and naturally it was good business, but it didn't do anything for their reputations as handling cars. So in just 3 years they produced a concept car based on the 325i, which was actually to test a new Z axle and rear suspension. It was to have a steel monocoque construction with plastic as a moulded body, and indeed plastic floor as well. Just to make it very 80s, it was all recyclable and therefore very green. Part of the concept was actually to have a very smooth under tray. Even the exhaust system was rounded off. And they claimed, probably with some degree success, that it was the first production car to actually have race car ground effects as a form of road holding. The low centre of gravity with this Z rear axle and all the other bits combined to make it a really much improved car. So when it was shown, there was a huge demand for it. It was really only a concept car, but as a result of demand, 2 years later they began making just 10 cars a week in a factory in Munich. There were 8,000 made in all, and officially they were sold at £37,000, but needless to say, in the late 80s there were a lot of silly premiums paid. This is that car. It's called the Z1. The Z2 didn't exist. The Z3 we all know and celebrate. The engine was the 2.5 litre that was traditionally in the 325i. It developed 170 brake horse. The trick was that they placed the whole unit behind the front axle in order to try and improve the suspension and the handling characteristics of the car. This was, of course, a show car, and therefore it was full of gimmicks and full of little things to draw attention. The seats, for instance, are a perfect 80s example. They are silk screened onto leather. And when it comes to doors, nothing gets more complicated if you're a late 80s lady in their evening kit than getting over and down into this machine. The door may have been considered something of a gimmick at the shows, but according to BMW, this is not an affectation. That was interesting. In the late 80s, I spent a lot of time driving a 318i, which, although I didn't own it, I seemed to feel very uncomfortable with. The problem was the back end always was on the move. It was very light and it was very unstable. This, on the other hand, is quite the reverse. These high sills give enormous sense of rigidity. There is no feeling of vulnerability. There's nothing like the Alpha Spider currently has, where you can feel the rattle and the scuttle shake. This feels very, very rigid, despite actually being made of plastic. A number of things about this are endearing. The gearbox is, as any BMW driver will tell you, a delight to use. The steering is very neutral. The balance of the weight is 49 to 51%. So again, it gave all the right ingredients to those who were criticising. It proved that BMW could create a really stable platform.